Should South Africans be forced to vote in local, provincial, and national elections? Should we put a box on the ballot paper that says none of the above for those among us who do not like any of the politicians that may be on the ballot paper? These are some of the recommendations made by Dr. Jakkie Cilliers, Executive Director of the Institute for Security Studies, in a new paper that looks at elections in South Africa and into the future. Dr. Jakkie Cilliers joins me today to discuss this recommendation and others in his new paper. Dr. Cilliers, welcome to the show. This is the second paper this year that you're releasing that looks at various scenarios for South Africa. What's the use of scenarios? Why do we have to look at, oh, this, that?
Because we need to know what is the impact of the choices we make over the long term. When you got up today, you looked at the weather and decided what you're going to wear. And we need to do the same in the longer term, because the choices that we are making going forward can have dramatic consequences. Some of the scenarios we did pointed to that, and it's like 18, 20, 30% differences in the size of the South African economy, which path we choose. And we looked at three paths originally: Bafana, our current pathway, nation divided, and Mandela Magic. And the differences between these for ordinary South Africans, the size of the economy, are significant.
So what you've done is take where we are today and project to just after the election, and then in these scenarios you look at various parts we could take up to 2029. Take me just to, we have an election coming up in a few weeks. People are obsessed with this election, and people have been asking us on Twitter, what does Dr. Cilliers think will happen with this particular election? Is the ANC going to retain, despite Nkandla, its big majority?
Two surveys have come out recently, that from ISPOS and ANN7, a competitor that looked at the future voting patterns. I don't think the ANC is going to get 2/3. I would expect the ANC to get about 61, 62%. I think the DA, 22%, around there. EFF, about 4, 5%. And those would be the top three parties. The choices that happen after that are going to be quite important, because I think the main issue at the moment is probably what is the long-term impact of, for example, Nkandla, and what is the stay-away vote going to be based on Nkandla. Now that, as your previous guests argued, probably going to have a limited effect, and probably only in the urban areas.
There are three issues that you, in considering the various scenarios, and we'll get into them, you consider three issues that you think are central to how things pan out. One, the centrality of the ANC, whether there's a split in COSATU, and the bond freeze. Take me through why you think the bond freeze are pivotal to how electorally things will come out.
The elections in May is probably not yet changed in South Africa, but I think it is common amongst all the political analysts that it is the start of a process of change. At the moment, people are not going to vote for an alternative party. If they are, and the majority of South Africans are ANC supporters, they may not vote. We may have a lower turnout. But as the bond freeze cascade through our system, by 2019, when we have our next elections, it's a different issue. The big challenge there is, are we going to find that South Africans get into a tradition, a habit of not voting? A third of South Africans already are not interested in politics. And that is something that concerns me about the quality of the democracy, both in terms of people just not interested in participating in politics, and also not caring what is happening. And these choices are absolutely critical for the issues of political accountability and where the country is going.
Let's talk about your first scenario, the Bafana. Tell us a bit about that, and where you see that taking us to 2029.
Bafana is a scenario of sort of the perennial underachiever. It is South Africa muddling through.
Is this where we are now?
This is our current trajectory. It is the most likely scenario. It is where the ANC continues to do well. It continues to govern the country up probably until 2029. The DA and others do okay, but they don't manage to break through and excite young, particularly young black voters, to vote for them.
You put the ANC at 216 seats on the Bafana Bafana circle in 2029, and the D at 144 seats in that year. That's that's basically us just the way we are now, with just slight movements on the two big sides anyway.
Increasingly we see people splitting their vote. They're voting differently at provincial as opposed to national level, and that is going to become a characteristic. But certainly you see Gauteng eventually becoming DA, and you see maybe the left-wing party established by NUMSA gaining some support. You see, in my view, the EFF drop support as a real left-wing party comes to the fore. But this is not a country with a clear direction that implements its future in a clear and targeted and no-holds-barred manner, where there is policy coherence.
Yeah. Let's move on to another scenario, and this one, you put the two next to each other. One is the rise of multi-party democracy. The other is the future is the ANC. Take us through the future is ANC scenario.
This is a scenario where the ANC, after the elections, undergoes a bit of a transformation, particularly at leadership level. This is where the ANC probably continues to maintain close to a two-thirds majority, maybe not two-thirds. It runs the country, but it really focuses on, probably through the appointment of an executive deputy president, probably Cyril Ramaphosa, it implements the National Development Plan, with COSATU having broken off, in a sense, NUMSA having broken off. COSATU, in a sense, is purified. It maybe becomes the labor desk of the ANC, and the ANC has the freedom to implement.
In this scenario, in this scenario, one, the ANC is freed up in terms of policy, and secondly, the numbers stay, because it's doing so well. The numbers stay. I think you projected 264 in 2029.
Yes, the ANC does well. It continues to do well. It leads the country. It is a party with 100 years background. It is a remarkable organization that is capable of rejuvenation. So it has that ability.
But is this a democracy, or is it a sort of semi-dictatorship, or how does it pan? Or is it just because the ANC will be doing such a good job, it will just continue to project?
There is no doubt that a competitive multi-party system structurally is much more healthy. It is much more desired for all South Africans. Competitive politics drives our future. But it is not impossible for the ANC to take the country forward and deal with the problems of inequality and poverty, and that the DA may be unable to break through the glass, to maintain the momentum that it's had over the last about 5-6 years.
You make another scenario, the rise of multipartyism, where the ANC goes to 172 seats and the DA stays at goes to 160 seats. But I want to take you to the next scenario, and that's the nation divided scenario, where you see the ANC. Tell us a bit about the nation divided and why we should try and avoid that.
A nation divided is where the ANC does this badly in the elections that lie ahead, and is concerned about what's going to happen at the next election in 2019, and it turns populist. The ANC says, what are we going to do is up social grants, have all kinds of regulations to improve particularly black economic empowerment, land restitution, and so on and so forth. The result is that the ANC probably does well at 2019, but after that the costs of their decisions become quite dramatic. And by 2030, the South African economy is about 18% smaller than it would be on our current trajectory of Bafana Bafana. So the ANC turning populist, it's sort of a Mugabe light, if you want to, is really the worst case scenario, I think, for South Africa.
What would you say your gut feeling is, this is where we should go and where you think we will go in terms of the scenarios you've sketched out? We are on Bafana Bafana. Are we going to be implode and be a nation divided, or are we a rise of multi-party democracy, or future is ANC?
You know, scenarios are just an aid to thinking, an aid to discussion. And one development, one scenario path can very easily morph into something else. I'm hoping that what we will see after May is the ANC will appoint and give authority to a deputy executive president who will be able to implement the National Development Plan, and that we can build a social compact on the National Development Plan. Chances of that happening, 40–50% at best.
One last thought. You make two recommendations. One regards the Van Zyl-Slabbert recommendations about representation. Just give us briefly your thoughts on that. And then you say maybe we should have mandatory voting.
Yes. South Africa struggles with an absence of political accountability. And there is no political accountability because you don't know who your member of parliament is, because we have a national and a provincial list. So we need to create a system where politicians, members of parliament, are brought down to smaller constituencies. Slabbert Commission said, I think, 69 member constituencies across the country. That's the first requirement. The second is really to make voting mandatory so that people are forced to participate and we stop opting out of politics. Many of us complain about what's happening in the country, but we don't accept our own duty of really engaging and making a difference, and the vote is the most important of that element.
Yeah. The Van Zyl-Slabbert recommendations were made more than 10 years ago. Nothing's happened. Do you think people will listen to you now?
No, I think it's what is interesting is that the original paper has brought this issue a little bit alive. And it is in actual fact to the advantage of the ANC, because its danger is really voters that don't vote. Mandatory voting will bring all its latent supporters out to the table.
Dr. Jakkie Cilliers, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Justice.
After the break, our winner and loser of the week. Stay with us.
News that moves. eNCA.com.